What's up, everybody? Dr. Josh here, clinical psychologist and natural bodybuilder, and I wanted to talk to you all about a very sensitive subject, and that is post-show or post-competition overeating. Now, if you've ever dieted for a bodybuilding competition or just dieted to a very, very low body fat percentage, I think you understand that there might be some compensatory overeating after the fact. Now, having said that, here are a few things that I learned along the way that I wish I had known, and hopefully it can help you in your journey should you be prepping for a bodybuilding competition or some dieting. So if you're interested in that or anything else bodybuilding and psychology related, hit subscribe and let's get to the episode. All right, so first of all, post-show binge eating. Now, this is just based off my experience and some of the things that I've read in the literature. So let's start off with my experience. The first thing I noticed that it started, or the buildup to any sort of post-show binge that I've ever had, started during the Carb-Up process. So you've dieted for weeks, and in some cases months, 4 to 6 months, maybe even longer, depending on how many different sort of dieting cycles that you went through to get stage ready. You are stage lean, super shredded, at least the shredded you've ever been, most shredded I've ever been. And my hunger signals obviously were wonky towards the end of the diet, but also the new experience of having this sort of infusion of carbohydrates was something extraordinary as far as my appetite goes. As I was carbing up, we did a backload for that second show. And so most of my carbs were, 2 days before the show. And as I was eating, I was noticing that my appetite kept going up, which is something that you may notice. So the sort of post-show binge doesn't necessarily begin immediately after the show, but you can start to get signals leading into the show. And then obviously you're going to be hungry throughout your diet, which is, the first indicator that you're in some kind of a calorie deficit. But notice how your hunger shifts and changes and moves as you add in those carbohydrates during your loading phase. And something to note here, like we're talking about sort of post-show binging, and this isn't something that's unusual, which is sad, right? Like, I wish nobody needed to experience or did experience any sort of post-show binge eating, but it is a pretty common occurrence. And I would say at least the literature within the last 10 years points to 50-60% of individuals, especially newcomers to bodybuilding, experience some kind of post-show binge eating, whether that's for weeks or months or years. This is just sort of reported behavior from competitors immediately post-show. So it's a common occurrence, unfortunately. All right, so the number 2 sort of indicator for me about my post-show binge eating behavior, obviously I've gotten better at dieting. And so after series of dieting, after weeks of dieting, I'm much better at sort of reversing out, having a plan. More on that later. But the first thing that, looking back, I notice is it started with the Carb-Up leading into the show, just that sort of appetite starting to pick up. And then also once I got my competitor bag. Now, you go to a bodybuilding show, a lot of these shows nowadays, at least the good ones, have pretty decent competitor bags with shirts, with bars, with samples, etc. I know at my show, OCB My Muscle Classic, May 16th, 2026 next year, just had our first show. Sorry, had to do a small plug. But I know at my show, I wanted to give the competitors a good experience. So I wanted to load them up with samples, but I also wanted to, give them, what else do we have in our culture? We have protein bars, we have pre-workouts. I also gave them things to possibly help them along with their Carb-Up. I gave them some plain rice cakes, and I gave them some peanut butter. And so a lot of these items, although great and sort of expressed a genuineness from the promoter to the competitor, can also sort of fuel that sort of binging or post-show rebound, because it's food that you've not been around for a while, or it's at least food that I hadn't been around for a while. So for me, that competitor bag was great, but once I stepped off the stage, even before I got to go and have a meal with my friends, that was something that I had with food that was no longer really off limits. In my last show, it was my last show. And so I was able to then, this was before, recovery dieting and reverse dieting was a thing, a little more than 10 years ago. Before a lot of this was talked about, I just had that bag now. And so I started taking down these protein bars. And so with that, the rebound sort of began, like literally the second I stepped off stage, and then so on and so forth, which is kind of unfortunate. And again, just as a reminder, like the risk for this, the risk for post-show rebound, is even more pronounced in sort of novice competitors. So the cool thing here is the more you compete, the more experience that you get. The post-show rebound becomes less and less of a thing. Honestly, it could be some sort of survivorship bias in terms of who continues to compete, those who don't experience sort of these post-show binging cycles. But I think, we do see that more advanced competitors tend to binge less. So there's some hope there. And so novice beginner competitors really pay attention to this and pay attention to your environment, because if it's going to happen to anybody, it's more than likely it's going to happen to you. The next thing I'll sort of note about my, the first time that I did well on a bodybuilding stage and sort of the post-show rebound was after I was done celebrating with my friends, sort of became a permission slip for binge eating. So me and my buddy Steve, we immediately post-show, we drove to his hometown, and they had this really cool 24-hour diner. And this was, immediately post-show, and I ordered everything. Did I finish everything? No, but I mean, I had everything. Milkshakes. I can't remember, it was so long ago, but I ordered everything on the menu. You can imagine if you've done a show and you've experienced something like this, but the post-show celebrations, if not planned appropriately, can and probabilistically could lead to some binge eating, and they did for me. And sort of the thing to note here is sort of post-show binge eating, this is going to lead to some anxiety, some shame, some guilt, some body image disturbance. And so that's sort of the factual information around what this can then lead to. So yes, one occurrence of eating a little bit more than you should have does not a pattern make. However, if it continues to be a pattern for you downstream from that behavior, again, psychologist here, that could lead, that behavior of binge eating or overeating could lead to some thoughts and feelings that are going to perpetuate more negative thoughts and feelings, anxiety about doing it again, shame about doing it in the first place, sort of a distorted body image that comes along with sort of rapid weight regain, especially if there is a huge discrepancy with where you are on stage with where you are, 10, 15, 20, 30 pounds up rapidly. These emotions are going to come about, and that's going to just honestly drive more of this behavior, which is something that we sort of want to pump the brakes on and we want to stop. From there, something else to consider, like with all those emotions and all those feelings and all that negativity going on, that sort of drove me to isolate myself a little bit. Like, I had some okay pictures post-show. I wish I had taken more. That's one thing you should do. You should definitely get a lot of pictures and a lot of videos, especially with the way cameras are and phones are nowadays. You can just get a ton of high quality stuff. I didn't have it back in the day. Anyways, you should. Back to isolation. So having gained a decent amount of weight, like immediately post-show, 10, 20 pounds, like within a couple of weeks, wild amounts of weights, I started isolating myself because I didn't look the way I looked. And to be honest with you, I felt a little ashamed. And so some of these binge eating behaviors then lead to these emotions, these negative emotions, which then lead to other behaviors that are only going to perpetuate more negative feelings. And sort of, so if you catch yourself, I would say, here's my thoughts here. If you find yourself isolating, that may be a time to ask for help, because isolating behavior is going to perpetuate a lot of the low mood and negativity that you have. And so then the next thing that I'll say about this is post-show binge eating sort of escalated. So you have that sort of lead up to your show that sort of starts perpetuating your appetite and the craving for more novel foods. And then you have the immediate post-show period where you have your competitor bag, which could trigger some things. Also the celebration with your family and friends, which could trigger some sort of binge or increased eating behaviors. And then after that, after you have sort of began to spiral, if this is the case, again, it's more likely in novice and beginner competitors. If you do begin to spiral and then you start to isolate yourself, which is going to perpetuate some of those negative feelings, for me, the thing that I found was the binging continued, and I put on 30 pounds and 40 pounds and nearing 50 pounds. And 10,000 calories, 12,000 calories in a day became nothing. And that's honestly, looking back, that's one of the scariest parts to me, is that I had put myself in such an evolutionarily compromised position, and my body was so out of sorts that whereas I was at probably, I don't know, between 1,300 and 1,500 calories, probably maybe at the lowest around the 1,200 calorie range for a couple of weeks. It was a couple of weeks. It was really, I was pretty deep into the deficit for me, along with whatever cardio I was doing at the time. And so the disparity between that and 10,000 calories just in my mind is just, it's so fast. Like that's almost, it's almost an entire week of eating, like towards the end there, trying to get lean enough that I crammed into one day. And so you'll notice that if you are lean enough, there was no end to your appetite. And that was one of the scarier parts post-show for me, was the vast amount of calories I could take in. And even beyond the actual feeling of physical fullness, I could eat beyond. That was pretty wild. All right, so once I had sort of, maybe not conquered, but hit my peak, sort of rebound immediately post-show, the shame was at its max, the guilt, wherever that was coming from. Guilt and shame are evolved emotions for a reason. They are there to tell us when we need to reconcile with an individual, because we are social creatures. However, when the guilt and shame arises out of your own behaviors and sort of your responsibility to yourself, that is a good indicator that some of these emotions in the situation of like post-show binge eating aren't very useful. I'd say if I had to look socially, the post-show rebound didn't make me want to talk to my coach. I didn't really want to hang out with my friends. Honestly, I didn't want to look in the mirror because it was just a disparity from where I had gotten to. And so, but I will say, with all that negativity sort of said, that there is hope post-show if you do rebound some. And so here are my thoughts on that. So number one thing, I should have asked for help a lot sooner. I should have gotten back with my coach, should have responded to some emails, should have texted some friends, should have found some ways to gradually reverse out of my competition diet. Now again, so I think I've recommended on this channel before, the recovery strategy, as noted on 3DMJ's wonderful product, The Vault. You should go check that out. Taking from where you started, so let's say you start at 3,500 calories and you end at 1,200 calories, finding an in-between point to increase your calories to is going to be a good start. So let's say you ended at 1,200, you're at 3,500. That would be like a 2,300 disparity. Cut that 2,300 in half. Forgive me for doing math in my head. That's what, 1,150? Tack on that 1,150 to that 1,200. That brings you up to around 2,400 calories. And I think that sort of, cuts away some of the mystique of post-show rebounding and recovery, because more often than not, it's just like, we don't know where to start. So if you want to pick a starting point for your recovery, it would be to increase calories substantially, go from where you were to where you were at, and find some spot in the middle. So I would do that the next time. I am going to do that the next time I come out of a competition prep. And the last sort of thing that I would do post-show, because you're going to have an increase in these thoughts and in these sort of negative emotions, I would begin trying to identify whenever I'm having thoughts that are associated with sort of cravings and less with actual physiological hunger. I would say being able to identify some of the things that you are thinking and getting some distance from those thoughts is going to be very helpful in terms of your sort of downstream behaviors. So I just got back from a conference, and a real cool skill that I already knew about was just to sort of write down your thought on a Post-it note. And you could post that on yourself, or you could post that on a mirror, or you could post that somewhere where you're going to see it, and just literally just writing out the thought like, I'm noticing cravings, or I'm having the thought that I'm hungry. And just writing that down on a Post-it note may sound odd or weird, but what that does is it allows you to identify what's going on in here instead of letting it run under the surface and sort of drive your behaviors. You externalize it, you get it out of your head, you get it onto a piece of paper, and that paper, that space between your thoughts and your actions, gives you more time to then engage in behaviors that are more conducive with your goals and values. So I would say that. So ask for help, have a starting point, and then find some way to create some distance between your thoughts and behaviors. Because psychologically, if we're thinking, CBT-wise, cognitive behavioral therapy-wise, cognitive model-wise, you have thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and they all impact each other. And from a clinical perspective, the way we impact that is we intervene at any one of those points. And so for here, start at the level of your thoughts. Try and create some space. That way, you can then turn into behaviors that are more aligned with your goals and values. Alrighty, folks, remember, these restricting binging cycles can become pretty commonplace, especially if you go into a deep enough deficit for long enough. So be open to asking for help. Now, whether that's from a coach, a mental health provider, please seek mental health providers should you need them, or should this sort of restrict binge pattern become sort of pervasive in your life. Seek that help out. Have a reverse out strategy. And then if you want to do some of this sort of internal work on your own, just start noticing your thoughts and writing those down on a Post-it note and just sticking them somewhere. See what that does for you. See if that creates a little bit of space between you and the downstream behaviors that you don't want to engage in. So I hope that was helpful. And if it was, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you all in the next episode for something bodybuilding or bodybuilding psychology related. Hope you all have a great day. And should you need anything, shoot me a comment and I'll try to get back to you. Peace.